are talking about ethical strategies for bias-free AI. We're going to put it in the context of talent acquisition and HR. We're going to look at some use cases. We'll go into what it actually means to build, in this industry that is really looked at as a high-risk industry for AI to be developed due to the data that we deal with and the responsibility that we have within the processes that we do and so on. And then we will look at compliance, regulatory landscape, and so on. But before we do that, I would ask you, Chandler, to introduce yourself a bit of your background, where you work, what's your day job, what's
Sure.
Workday about, and then I'll do the same, and then we...
Sure. So Chandler Morse, I'm Vice President for Corporate Affairs, as our great MC said. I am DC-based, so I joined Workday about 5 years ago, about 5.5 years ago now. I manage all of Workday's government relations. So we have a U.S. team that interacts with Congress and the administration, as well as, which I think we'll talk about a little bit about, as well as quite a bit of state and local work now, where a lot of the action on AI is. And then we have a global team, so I have folks in Brussels working with the European Commission and those entities, as well as in London managing our UK public sector and public policy work. And recently, we're super excited, we expanded our footprint into Singapore. So the APJ region has quite a few interesting conversations on AI. About Workday, well, for background, I spent 13.5 years on Capitol Hill in DC. With a member of Congress both in the House and in the Senate, so touched on a number of policy issues, including tech policy there, which we might talk about a little, such that the U.S. Congress ever actually does anything with tech policy. We were engaged with it, and then joined Workday as our first full-time government relations hire. So Workday is a leading cloud-based human capital management, finance, and analytics service provider. Our customers are the largest companies in the world, so we provide back-end services to the majority of the Fortune 500. So we sit at this really unique place at the crossroads of the global economy, which is also why then our footprint when it comes to public policy engagement takes a global footprint.
Thank you.
That's it.
That's pretty cool. So Andreea Wade, VP of Product Strategy, iCIMS. iCIMS, we're based here in Dublin, but iCIMS is a US company. So we are active in talent acquisition for the last 22 years. I joined iCIMS back in 2020 when a company that I co-founded and led as the CEO was acquired by them. We were a Dublin-based data science company building matching technology for the talent acquisition industry. So we did a lot of work around understanding the world of jobs, understanding the world of applicants, and bringing all of that together meaningfully and responsibly and so on. My job today within this company is to build our global AI strategy. We'll build the AI for the whole company from here in Dublin. This is a scaling company. We've made 5 acquisitions in the last 3 or 4 years, and there'll probably be more. And we're very lucky to have I always say this because I'm proud of it. I hope it's not final, famous last words. It will happen, but nobody has yet left from the team. That was the startup.
Oh, wow.
3 years later, everyone is still there.
That's great.
And there's kind of 2 reasons. One is they like each other, but they really, really like what they do, and they feel a personal responsibility around the technology that they're building and the impact that they can have. So I kind of mentioned matching tech. This is one of the use cases within the talent acquisition part, I suppose. You send your CV in, lands in a DB, you're hoping you're going to get matched to a job, and you're hoping you're going to get that call, and so on and so forth. So that was one of the use cases that we built this whole company for. And when we got acquired, we had like 30-something APIs that did different things, matching people to jobs to people, living in the world of skill taxonomies and making meaningful connections, between skills and titles and seniority and depth of skill and all of that to truly understand that in order to bring that accuracy and that responsibility to this matching process. But we also have various different other use cases that we work for, and they're kind of established within TA, chatbots that talk to candidates, and various different other things. But to bring this back to you, can you talk a little bit about the use cases that you guys solve for?
Yeah, I think it's really important to start the conversation here because it's, as you mentioned, kind of HR, when you look at the AI field and particularly from the government side, the scrutiny that it's getting, there's a few areas that really are kind of the magnet of attention. So criminal justice, healthcare, financial services, and HR. And it can be easy to think, like, if all you're listening to is kind of the concern and the rhetoric, like, it can be easy to think, like, wow, if that's so risky, why are you guys involved in it? Is it the equivalent of driving a car at 100 miles an hour with no seatbelt? Like, why would you even think about that? And so it's really important, I think, to start the conversation with what a game changer AI is in the HR space. And for us, we've been involved in AI preceding last November when it seemed like the entire world got involved in HR. We've been involved in AI development in the HR space for about a decade. And the reason, the easiest thing to explain, and if I'm honest, and my colleagues have heard me share about this 100 times, like the thing that I get really excited about is skills. So as you mentioned, for really taking a skills-based approach to scale, you really have to have an AI tech layer to do it. And many of us and I don't know, I usually say many of us because I'm usually talking to HR-focused audiences, so maybe not many of us, maybe many of us have been talking about skills for decades. I mean, it's not a new concept. And there's a ton of benefits to a skills-based approach, which we all kind of intuitively know, right? It lowers the barrier to entry from if you're setting the barrier to entry for entering the workforce with a 4-year college degree, you're really limiting who can get into the workforce. It also opens up a potential agility and mobility for incumbent workers. Many times in the talent acquisition, the focus on AI is on candidates. But you have to remember that the vast majority of those in the workforce are not candidates. They're incumbent workers in place with changes happening all the time. And so if you're going to start to answer the questions of what kind of skills do I need, what kind of skills does the company need, what kind of skills does the company have, what kind of skills do they need to go get and develop to be successful both on the worker and the employer side, you have to have a common language about skills, which seems really easy, except that if I put out a survey now and I asked everyone to mention, to talk about your top 10 skills, with a room full of this size, we would get 10,000 different descriptors of skills. And maybe some of them would be the same, maybe some of them would be different. Somebody would say coding, someone would say Python. Are you talking about the same thing? Are you not? 6 people would say project management. They would all have different versions of, budget, task management, staffing allocation. All can be filed under project management, depending on kind of how. And so when you look at skills data for any sizable organization, it has a number of characteristics. One, there's a ton of it. There's a ton of data. Everyone in this room, if I asked you to list your top 10 skills, you would feel upset that you were leaving things on the table, right? Like, what about the rest? What about the other 10 and the other 10 and the other 10? So there's a ton of data. It's changing all the time, and it's spaghettied together in terms of relationships of different names, not the same titles. And that kind of problem, tons of data, needing to drag out actionable inferences, it's ready-made for AI. It is the problem that AI is built to solve. And so what we're able to do in Workday with 65 million employee records in our system, thousands of customers, thousands of workers, and is we're able to take that data and start to pull that spaghetti apart and start to draw inferences to say, hey, Chandler, you just applied for this role. You said you've got legislative analysis experience. Do you also have legislative drafting? Do you also have political science? Do you also have constitutional law? Because the last 1,000 people that we saw with those skills also had those. And you can start to see people able to really flesh out their skills through a bottom-up, suggestion model. And that suggestion model is really important to us because it keeps the user in control. It's not, hey, we looked at your resume, we've assigned these skills, we're going to go put you in this automated thing, and then out it's going to come this process. It's more, hey, as you go through this process, do you want to add these skills to your profile? Are you interested? And that sounds, and I've talked to a lot of people about this, it sounds super easy. People are like, well, that's intuitive. It's super easy. What do you mean? And it's not super easy. It's very difficult. And the last thing I'll mention is from a public policy perspective, I have worked on entry-level worker issues for most of my career. And so if you take a room like this, chances are none of you might need this kind of information we're talking about, right? You probably can advocate for yourselves. You probably can come up. But if you're an entry-level worker and you're applying for a job, I remember applying for jobs as an entry-level worker, and I hated it. I hated it. You apply not for one job, you apply for 50, you apply for 100, you apply after you get the kids to bed, after you're exhausted, and somebody comes along and says, what skills do you have? And in that moment, you are in the worst position to advocate for yourself. What skills do I have? The 3 that are at the top of the mind, so I can get this done, so I can get to bed because I have to go to work tomorrow. That's the position most job seekers are in. And applying AI to skills starts to open that up and enrich and deepen that profile from a user-controlled experience. And once you have that agreed upon taxonomy, you can start to build talent marketplaces for incumbent workers, for people. Hey, I've got these skills. I'm looking for different opportunities. Hey, I've got these roles. Who's got these skills? And you can start to easily match them up. And the last thing, and then I'll stop talking because I have this ticker clicking down next to me, like my life's ticking away.
Which it is.
There was the voice of God, and now the ticking is data-driven career insights. So, it's not your uncle, your friend, your buddy's cousin said, hey, this thing might be helpful. It's actually inside this company, the last people that had your role took these 5 career steps. Are you interested in any of them? Oh, you're interested in that one. Here's some suggested learning that the company can offer you automatically. And the part that I adore is, here are 3 people that agreed to be mentors. Do you want to go talk to one of them about what this career trajectory could look like? And all of a sudden, what you have is not, I'm going to roll the dice and hope for the best. You have a data-driven actual career path that's sketched out based on real roles. So with that kind of upside, it starts to make sense why we just have to build this stuff in a way that people can trust, because we're very interested in unlocking that upside for workers.
Thank you. I love this conversation about skills. I think I used to do debate in college and whatever. I was very good at it, but I was just kind of lazy to do it. They kept dragging me to the stage and whatever. So it's interesting to hear you speak about the world of skills, right? And opportunity, but also risk. Like, why would you do this if it's so, right? And I could see both sides. On one end, you're taking that data in and you're saying, I'm going to kind of profile you. I'm going to build a blueprint of you and see what's out there for you that, is relevant. If I go back to old technologies, which I do find interesting that we never actually talk about that old technologies would look at the keywords, and if they were not there, you were invisible unless you wrote them in white font 50 times, hitting them in the CV. But realistically, old unintelligent technology was highly biased because it was dumb. It couldn't see you, right? So today we see you, we build a profile of you. The negative thing could be, okay, you didn't understand me. The way you're building all these profiles, you have maybe bias in them and you're skewing whatever way. But on the other hand, if you go, I'm not great at writing CVs. I'm at the beginning of my career. I wrote 3 things. But this technology, what it does, do you know what? We've looked at millions of people like you. And we've seen these 3 skills. But we've also seen that they probably also have these other 4 skills. There's the skills that you give us and the derived skills and this in-context, intelligent understanding of what you're made about. And when you said, the big opportunity and how this technology can change the TA and the HR space, this is what we're talking about. Building responsibly and building meaningfully, I guess. So, that takes us into, what is ethical AI and what does it mean to build responsibly? Yeah. What is it? It's
a great question. And again, we come at this from a perspective of people won't use technology that they don't trust. We also come at this, and I say this, you'll just have to take my word for it. But Workday is a very values-driven company. So at the end of the day, we not only have kind of our customers' expectations, we have our own expectations of how we're going to operate in this space, what tools we're going to build, and what standards we're going to hold ourselves to. It's why I sort of so easily moved from my Capitol Hill job to my Workday job, because it turns out I didn't know the language for needing values-based employment, but that's in fact what I was looking for. So for us, ethical AI starts with the people. We have a responsible AI board that senior members of our company sit on, our chief legal officer, our chief ethics officer, our chief responsible AI officer. I sit on it. And that is a clearinghouse for decision making around what is or isn't going to happen. It's important to know that in Workday, our responsible AI team, which is led by a former EEOC scientist, actually reports up through our chief ethics officer, not through our chief product officer. So it's a very clear distinction on kind of what's making those ethical decisions. We also have our principles, which we've sat down and delineated. This is what we're going to hold ourselves to in terms of positively impacting society, championing fairness, making good on our privacy commitments. And then we've got practices where we have documented review protocols on how we actually develop and test and monitor and deploy our AI. So for us, it's a very conscientious, very intentional program that we have set up around how to develop AI ethically.
Thank you. I feel like whatever you're saying, I can say same, but not to say that there's a copy-paste approach to this, but there is an approach that is around being invested in this space and understanding that we have a responsibility to our end users and so on. We have about 6,000 customers across the globe, and last year, is this recorded? No, I don't know marketing, don't kill me, but I think we hired 6 million people through our platform.
Oh, wow.
Which is way bigger than the population of Ireland. Right, so we have to look at this from a responsible perspective, not because the law says so. The company that I co-founded and led as the CEO, we didn't even have a GDPR back then, and we, just a little info, I don't have a background in recruitment or TA or HR. We were frustrated candidates that were like, why if I send my CV and I know, I'm not deluded, I might be, but I kind of know that I am relevant towards this role, why do you not see me?
Interesting.
And we decided to build technology for the recruiter for the benefit of the candidate. Right, so from day one, we were like, okay, here's data that I do not want to put in here because it was about me. I was the candidate, and I wanted you to have a tool that will see me. But that meant data that I will not give you. That meant, responsible design, from the get-go, and so on. Of course, today, with everything that's happening in the world since November, but I suppose even before that.
But mostly since November.
Mostly since November. It feels like, AI is a thing, which is, great. I still have a job, that means, before I'm replaced by the machines. No. There is a lot of regulatory kind of focus, and there's, the EU AI Act coming into play, and under that, HR tech, TA tech solutions are seen as high risk. So we're there with biometrics, we're there with immigration, we're there with the police, education, and so on. So we have to take this seriously, not just because the law tells us to, but because we have an understanding of the impact and the kind of work that we do and the data that we deal with and so on. And I know that you guys, obviously you have a background in all of this, but you guys have a very hands-on approach in relation to understanding where this is going, being there, talking to the regulators, and tell us a little bit about that.
So I think, again, the building blocks for us are, we want to build technology that people will use, so they need to be able to trust it. That translates into our own internal practices, and we don't need government officials to tell us how to develop AI ethically. We have our own motive and desires to do that. But for those that we want to have use the technology, we see a very important role for government regulation to build trust. And so for that, from the get-go, we've leaned in heavily on supporting regulation, which puts us in a really interesting place because not all of our tech colleagues are as interested in regulation, and sometimes we have to convince people that we're meaningful and we actually mean it. And so the way that we have structured our program around convincing people of that is we show up with the regulatory language, with the sketched out program, with the amendment language, with the bill language. There is this sense, there's a tremendous focus on regulation at the moment. EU is farther ahead than everyone. They started this in 2018. We engaged with the EU, having watched GDPR when they said we're going to regulate AI. When I was on Capitol Hill when the EU said they were going to regulate privacy, and we all sort of laughed and said, "Good luck with that. They'll never get it done." And then all of a sudden they passed it. So when they said we're going to regulate AI, Workday took it very seriously. one thing that the EU knows how to do is pass tech regulation. And so we engaged early and heavily in the high-level expert group, in the follow-on consultation, when the language was produced, and then within the Parliament and Commission and member state debates, and even through the trilogue, offering constructive feedback. Now, I want to be very honest with you. It was a really wonderful process because we were pushing on an open door in many ways. The European policymakers understood clearly, having come out of GDPR, how technical some of these areas can be. And so when we showed up to say, well, what if you did it this way? Or can we head off this sort of like box canyon that you might be heading into to go into this lane? They were very open to our feedback. And so we feel like at the end of the day, the EU AI Act is headed towards passage in March and April, and we feel like there's a lot to like. The risk-based approach is nuanced and thoughtful. The regulatory requirements will we think build trust, but are also workable and something that we can still continue to innovate. There is this tension, it seems to be, between innovation and regulation, and for us, we want to sort of restructure that, because again, people aren't going to use technology that they don't trust, and if people aren't going to use technology, people aren't going to innovate towards that goal. And so for us, it's not innovation or regulation, it's regulation supporting innovation, to open up markets, to drive these technologies forward. That conversation is very germane and very ripe in Europe, and we're really pleased, frankly, with the direction. There'll be secondary acts that need to be passed, and there'll be standards. There's a lot more work, a lot more job security for my team as that process unfolds. But there's also ongoing conversations in APJ and quite a bit of conversation in the US. As I mentioned, and I can sort of throw rocks at Congress because I worked there for a long time, I've earned that right. We don't expect Congress to pass anything anytime soon, and the states, just like they did in GDPR, are already taking up the mantle. So we've already gone into California and started to sketch out what we think can be an interoperable and sound path forward, and that bill was introduced last week as AB 2930, and Workday formally endorsed it after working with the sponsors to craft it. So it's a tremendous, the last thing I'll say, and I don't know if, this thing turns red and beeps when it's like, it's no joke. The last thing I'll say, and it's a pleasure to be here, and it's great to get a chance to talk to you. We've never been in this place before with tech regulation, in that often the regulation comes after not only the horse is out the barn door, but 2 or 3 fields away, and we're fielding dramatic incoming from unintended consequences. In this case, the conversation globally is so ripe. Europe is in the place that it has now traditionally, I think you could say, been in that a little bit forward-leaning on a regulatory structure that we think can work. But at the same time, APJ, the US, Canada, there's just a ton of other conversations. There's a ton of focus on getting this right. So my pitch and my plea is, if you're not engaged in the AI regulatory conversation, please get engaged in the regulatory AI conversation, because we're at the point now where the jello is starting to harden, and we're excited about it and think it's going in a pretty good direction, but there's no guarantee we get to a place where that's hardened in a way that we can really see the benefits of these technologies.
Thank you,
and
Chandler.
It does glow
Not
red.
only that, but I'm getting signs from up there. We have to go. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.